we pay tribute to today. This week, our fight is not against an oppressive political system, but rather a virus whose impact is undeniably, as I said, oppressive. A virus that is threatening the lives and livelihoods, as I said, of workers who pay tribute to today. Today, being the 1st of May, South Africa ends 5 weeks of lockdown. And today our country enters into level 4 risk, which signifies an easing of restrictions, which enables some workers to resume employment. Despite this though, many of us are still feeling heightened emotions. And many of us are still feeling anxious as we realize that we will be sparring with COVID-19 for many months to come. We have observed the rage of COVID-19 throughout the globe, and we're beginning to understand the stark implications in our very own country. We're also starting to grapple with the very real impact that COVID-19 will have on our everyday lives. Even the optimists among us have felt their faith falter. Resilience is the strength and speed of our response in adversity. Adversity such as COVID-19, it's not about how much you need, but rather how do you build it? And joining me today to address this very question is Dr. Gilbert Dennis and Clinton Gahwiler. I met Gilbert a year ago and our journey has been transformational. He is an international award-winning professional integral coach who is focused on executive leadership development. He's a faculty member at UCT's Center for Coaching and the Graduate School of Business. His professional experience includes working as a clinical health professional for 18 years. Clinton has practiced at CISA since 1995. His passion is to help clients develop, implement, and maintain strategies which optimize performance and well-being on a sustainable basis. He is experienced in sports psychology, in health psychology, and it is in corporate areas really where these practices and experience best come together. It's in the business context that he feels his expertise in sports and health best show their shine. Just in terms of our discussion for today, we have an hour with you, and how we'd like to frame the conversation really is start by Dr. Gilbert Dennis taking us through how to author your journey in turbulent times, and then handing over to Clinton, who will give us a DIY toolkit on building personal resilience. Thereafter, we'll enter into a Q&A session, and at this point, I'd like to direct you, if you're joining us from Zoom, then direct you to the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to post questions there throughout the webinar, and we'll address all these questions at the end. If you're joining us from Facebook, similarly, please post your questions in the comments, and these will be directed to us. I look forward to being empowered today by both of your insights. Gilbert, over to you.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Phathokuhle, for those kind introductory words there. So, like introduced, I'd also like to pause just a moment. Part of my background is I used to be a shop steward back in the day, and celebrate workers because, yeah, it's what drives our economy, it's what drives and creates opportunity for all of us. And so here we are, 5 weeks into lockdown. We know our numbers. We've surpassed the 5,000 COVID-19 seropositives. We have over 2,000 people having recovered out of that, so that ratio looks kind of settling for one. And we cannot deny the mortality, surpassing 100. But I guess there is an anxiousness about what's to come going forward. And one of the things we're trying to do with that kind of state is we try and label it quickly so we can define it and work with it. So words create worlds for us, right? And one of the words I'd like for us to look at, because when you create a world for yourself, you also create the rules within it. And one of the words that social distancing has come from COVID. By intention, I get it and understand it. The idea is to stay apart, isolate, not contaminate. But what we long for is connection. We long for social connection. And I think a better descriptor might have been physical distancing and social connection. And so my sense is quite often when we, in a flurry of things coming at us, one of the ways to not go into it is to not label prematurely. It's how do we hold back on the labeling and just take stock of what is really going on, what is my intention, and what is the impact I'd like to have. And so closer to home in our own spaces, what is it we're telling ourselves? How often is it we're telling ourselves one thing and the impact on us is distinctly different, right? If one just thinks about, for example, New Year resolutions, I'm going to do this for this year, and the impact is that slowly it dissipates. And I guess going forward, what COVID-19 has done is it's created a pause for all of us. In some places and some instances, it's created a complete halt. And so we have to acknowledge that the normal we knew is in our past, and we all have a past. And we celebrate that the past has brought us to where we are, which is the present moment. And from within the present moment, we can hold back the past and we can look to the future. Yes? And so from in the present moment, we can actually look back and we can reflect. My invitation is just pause and reflect to what were your goals at the beginning of this year? What was the strat for the year? How has that shifted? And all of that you can observe from within the moment. And so closer to home, what has it got to do with me? My invitation, if you will, is join me and just check in with yourself. And without altering it, just check where is your breathing? Where are you breathing from? Is it fast or slow? Is it deep, all the way down to your diaphragm? Is it halfway? What's going on for you? So that is an observation and right there in the moment. And then the other thing we can do from in the moment is we can project into the future. And so the big question with projecting into the future is, when you do that, how much of it is done without contaminating it with the past? Can you actually stand in the present moment and project without fearing that the mistakes you made in the past, the things you didn't want to have come to fruition? And is it an acknowledgement that going forward, you're going to do exactly what you did in the past? And in that way, you're going to create exactly the same stumbling blocks? Or as you go forward, is it trying to do something different? And we have to acknowledge that the future kind of is an emerging future. It's coming toward us. And as opposed to only learning from the past, what if you can learn from the future as it emerges? So there's an interesting body of work done by Otto Sharma on Theory U. And I guess what he stresses is we have a lot of competencies, we have a lot of vistas inside of us that we have access to. And just because we don't tap into it, we don't have the full benefit of learning from the future as it emerges and then strategizing what is it we want to do with it. Nobody's lived your life as an individual going forward, right? And so if you stand in the present moment, whatever step you take going forward, if you're not authoring it, something else is authoring it for you. And my invitation is stay in that space and try and sort of just reflect, observe what goes on for you, and also get a sense of where would I like to head to and how do I dance with myself in a distinctly different way. So the way in is awareness. Yeah, what I'm unaware of, I cannot work with. And the invitation for all of us here, I guess, is to just pause a moment and reflect on the last 5 weeks. Don't go far back, just the last 5 weeks with the announcement of the lockdown. What has shifted for you both professionally and personally? And so what awareness ushers in is an opportunity to look closely. When you look closely, you begin to see things which in this fast-paced world, we kind of miss. And so if you're looking with the usual way of looking, you're going to see what you usually see. And the encouragement is, how do you begin to ask questions to which you don't know the answers? And it's not to add to the turbulence. It really is to expand your awareness. That's the idea with how do you ask questions to which you don't know the answers. And the challenge that we all have is we have these things called blind spots. You know, just because we can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it's for that reason we go into community. There are people around us who can identify those for us. I personally work with a coach because, and I've made peace with that. You know, I resisted it for a long time, but I've made peace that on every level of my own journey in terms of development, I'm going to come across those things that I'm not going to see. And the wacky thing is everybody around you can see your blind spots and you're behaving as if nothing's wrong. Yeah. And then the other thing that this process does of slowing down, raising your level of awareness, is actually it enables you to speed up. If you think about a 100-meter athlete, and we're suggesting to her she has to shave a few hundredths of a second off her time. We're not going to make her run 100 meters ad nauseum. We're going to slow her down. We're going to say, maybe for endurance, you'll run 120. We're going to practice and focus on the start. How do you take off? How do you upright? How do you run into your stride and down the straight? And also, how do you finish? We're going to slow down this race into those kinds of segments. Parallel to that, we're going to do a lot of gym work, a lot of nutrition, a lot of psychology. And at some point, we're going to integrate it. And it's the net effect of all of that that's going to speed this person up. And so what if I offered you another lens? Because lenses bring things into focus, right? And we're trying to expand awareness. And we have a dominance in terms of how we show up in the world. We're either using a mindset to navigate our way, or a heart set, or a whole body. The mindset people are the thinkers, the heart sets are they feel their way through the world, and the body sets are the doers, and they'll think and feel later. But when in adversity, we all tap into all of those, whether we like it or not. And again, just because we don't, it might be a blind spot, so just because we don't see it, we don't think it impacts us, and it does. So in terms of mindset, where's your current thinking? Is it the past? Is it the present? Is it future focused? Where are you thinking? What's the current recurring thoughts that you have? I have a little bit of a background in epidemiology, so I can think about the past and the 1918 Spanish flu and the curves and what happened there. I can think currently about COVID-19 and what's going on. I can also shift towards the future and think about how do we actually herd immunize us against whatever's coming at us? What are the better strategies to do? And my sense is it's not going to be all of what's behind us. It's a combination of that, what's going on in the moment, and in navigating the way going forward. Heart set says, can I check in with me? What is the emotion I'm experiencing? What's the intensity of that emotion? Am I able to label the emotion? Or do I just say, I'm sad? Or are there gradations of sad? I'm mournfully sad. Or I'm happy, I'm ecstatic. Yeah? There's a crazy thing about the heart. And I'd like and invite you to ponder for a second. Of all the intelligences we have, and these are levels of intelligences that we can tap into, the heart is probably the superior intelligence. We don't think about it, but at 3 months, when you're looking at a scan, at least chronologically. If you're looking at a scan, you're not looking for neural activity, you're looking for cardiac activity. Is there a pulse? And yes, the synatrial node is firing, and the brain's not there yet, it's not completely formed yet. And on the other end of the spectrum, there are people who are diagnosed clinically as being brain dead, and their hearts are pumping. We know there's a body of work coming out about the gut intelligence as well. And so how do we tap into these reservoirs that we have untapped? Yeah? In terms of your body, it's what's going on when I'm distressed or anxious? Where in my body do I hold it? Are my shoulders tight? Is my gut knotted? What is going on for me? Can I just check in? Because one of the first things that goes, it's in our body, and if we're not alert to it, we can't pick it up. So our body becomes a dashboard. You know, one of the first things that goes when we're anxious is our breath. We either hold it, we suspend our breathing and we gasp for air, or alternatively, it becomes shallow and rapid. And so one of the ways to begin to settle your nervous system is simply by offering yourself deeper breaths of air. It slows down the heart rate, it oxygenates you, and settles your nervous system. Because once you become anxious, you're in your primitive brain, you have basic functioning, it's fight, flight, freeze, or appease. And the invitation is, how do you sort of notice that firstly, raise the level of awareness, notice it. And what if you can begin to pull yourself into your executive or prefrontal cortex with all the nice neurochemicals, and that's where you actually can collaborate, you can bond and change your mood. So it's the serotonins, the oxytocins, and the dopamines. And so when you're in these moments of distress, the invitation is, can I begin to experiment? And experimentation means I don't know what the outcome is going to be, but I have to courageously step into it. And I can collaborate with others. And so when things become unsettling, the invitation is, can you begin to go inward? And so here's another reflective exercise very quickly. You were thinking earlier on about, since COVID-19 lockdown began for you 5 weeks ago, what if you took what you were sitting with and you filtered it through your mindset, your heart set, and your body set, and look at what emerges for you in terms of possibility, where you can go and leverage from, and what are the areas that you kind of missed, didn't go into, and what are those areas of possibility to explore and experiment in. That's the invitation that I hold and offer each of you. Yeah. And so when in these times of adversity, the ultimate resource is not what's external to you. It's how resourceful can you become? Can you tap into all of what you have and bring that to the table? And if you did, how would life shape shift for you? How do you begin to script that next step in terms of where you want to go? And so all of this sounds very nicely at a cognitive level because we get it, we understand it. But the truth is, it requires a lot of work, self-work. That's what self-mastery is about. It's the diligence of practice that's going to get you there. And so in going back, just recapping what we spoke about, it's when you're unsure, sit with your vulnerability before you start labeling. Just pause on the labeling because it gives us a sense with once I've labeled it, I can work with it. But if you label prematurely, you're going to work with it and maybe in an incorrect way, and make sure that your intention and your impact, they're in alignment. Pause. Pause creates an opening for you to raise, what is the next thing, the level of awareness. And in terms of awareness, it's, can you look at the past, which has a normal? We have a current normal, which is fairly turbulent. And then we have a future normal that's emerging. So none of these are static, they're all dynamic. And because we've begun to take things for granted, we've become complacent. Anything that disrupts that creates an unnervingness inside of us. And how do you go back, regulate your nervous system? Just by breathing, taking it deeper. And then the vistas that you have access to, tapping into your mindset, heart set, and body set. How do you begin to practice going into the areas that are not your defaults, but yet you have access to? And there's a richness in that. How do you become an active participant in how life unfolds for you in authoring it, as opposed to observing and things happening to you? And as I said earlier, to master these what seem to be very simple practices, it's going to take the diligence of practice and patience to get you there. And so from my side, a huge thank you to the frontline workers in essential services. One cannot forget the hard work that these women and men are putting in to try and keep our curve flat that keeps us safe. And to all of you on the call, thank you very much for your attention. And I look forward to the Q&A. And without further ado, I hand over to Clinton.
Okay, thank you very much, Gilbert, for those insights. Phatho, for putting this together and for inviting us, and of course all of you who have taken the time out to actually watch this. Yeah, I think resilience is a very important topic, and particularly now, I think there's all the talk about the medical crisis, but I said it a week or two ago, I really feel that there's another crisis that's swelling in the background, and that of a psychological crisis as far as public mental health needs go. I think there are, I say it because I think there are so many people who are potentially vulnerable on the emotional level, perhaps because they have pre-existing conditions, be that anxiety, OCD, etc. And I think for people like the current situation can be particularly triggering. But actually, I think it applies to all of us. We're all needing to adjust to all sorts of things, the changes that Gilbert alludes to, potentially loss, and loss happens on a number of levels, not just of a person. Loss can be of a dream, loss of a business, and so on. So I think resilience is a particularly important topic for us to be discussing at this point. What is resilience? There's a basic dictionary definition: the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape, so it's elasticity. I think from an emotional or a psychological perspective, it's exactly the same thing. It's how well we respond to challenges, to stressful circumstances, how quickly we can go back to the state we were in beforehand. And typically we do that through various helpful behaviors, and perhaps there are also various mental processes or techniques that we use to do that. So I thought I would talk about a toolbox, and a DIY toolbox to build personal resilience. I guess the official reason for that is because I want to make it as practical as possible. Maybe the unofficial reason is that psychologists, I think, sometimes tend to be a little bit insecure about not having as many tools as some of the other medical professionals, the physios and the doctors. We can maybe call it stethoscope envy, I don't know. But anyway, so I'm trying to make it as practical as possible. So the idea was actually to talk about a whole list of things that you can do and tools that or skills that you can develop that are useful. But I realize we actually have a very short time. So there are actually just two key things that I am going to talk about, which I think are perhaps, well, the two most important components of a DIY toolbox. But before we do that, I think it's important to just sketch a few basic principles which really inform how we go about developing our resilience. And the first basic principle is that we are all different, and different things work for different people. So everywhere we look, there are 7 habits of effective people, or there are 10 steps towards this, etc. And I've also done things like that, but it's a complex matter. And I think any simplistic formulation is going to fall short because different things work for different people. So I would encourage you, while you listen to me, you've been listening to Gilbert and Phathokuhle, maybe you read books, but through all of that, really, your challenge is to take out the bits and pieces that can best work for you. The second basic principle is that we are stressed not by circumstances, but by our own interpretations of the circumstances. So we always blame people and what's happening, but it's how we think about those things which shape our emotions, and hence how we respond, and ultimately what happens next in our lives. This is not a new concept by any means. If we go back in time, William James, American philosopher and psychologist around the turn of the now previous century, I think, said that the greatest discovery of his generation was that by changing our inner thoughts, we can change the outer aspects of our lives. So he was right about the sentiment, but he was wrong about it being his generation that discovered that. Because if we go further back in time, John Milton spoke about the mind being its own place in itself. It can make heaven of hell or hell of heaven. Further back, William Shakespeare, things are not good or bad, but thinking makes them so. And then all the way back to Epictetus, we are disturbed not by things, but by the view we take of them. So if we're looking for solutions, just bear in mind there's no single correct solution. There are just better solutions for you, better solutions for me. And the key point here really is that no matter what's happening in the circumstances around us, which we can't necessarily always control, how we think about our circumstances, that always stays controllable. A third basic principle that I think we need to mention is that anything can be a coping strategy, coping with stress, but some tend to be more helpful than others. So, for example, smoking is in fact a coping mechanism, but it causes problems in the longer term. Similarly too with avoidance. Avoidance is a way that we all cope sometimes. We procrastinate. Comfort eating, we heard a lot of during lockdown. So these are all coping strategies, but the similarity is that what they do is they help us to cope with the anxiety in that moment, but at the same time, potentially escalating the actual initial problem in the bigger picture. So we need to really make a distinction about, are we coping with the actual scenario, or are we actually just trying to manage our emotions about that problem? Fourth point I'd like to make is that human beings are inherently very resilient and adaptable, which is probably why we dominate this planet. You know, we constantly use phrases like, I can't stand this or I can't stand that. But it's simply not true, because all of us, every occasion in our lives to date that we have ever used that phrase, the actual reality is we have withstood those circumstances. We don't enjoy them, but that's an entirely different matter. And when it comes to adaptability, we are incredibly adaptable. And I'm often hearing people say, I can't change, you know, it's too late, this stage of my life to change. It's simply not true. Human beings are incredible change organisms. In fact, sometimes it feels difficult to change precisely because we are changing, but in the wrong direction. So as an example, when it comes to physical activity, a lot of people will perhaps make a New Year's resolution and they'll exercise for 2 weeks, and then maybe they go on holiday and it stops. And then 2 months later, they think of phoning sports science maybe joining the gym, and they go to gym for 3 weeks and then they get sick and it stops. And that happens maybe 3 or 4 times during the year. And when you add up in total the amount of time that they've exercised through the year, or the amount of time that they've practiced maintaining a healthy lifestyle, it comes to perhaps 2 months of the year, which means that 10 months of the year, they've been practicing doing the exact opposite. And the more you practice something, the better you become at it, because we learn so well. So it's simply not true to say that we cannot learn and we cannot change. Actually, we are changing all the time. We just need to make sure that we are changing in the direction in which we want to be going. 5th point, growth inevitably requires a willingness to step outside of existing comfort zones. And I think that's a survival mechanism. We seek comfort to stay safe. We seek shelter from the storm above, or we seek food to keep us alive, etc. But again, human beings have become very good at seeking comfort. And when we do it too well, it potentially holds us back from developing ourselves further. I just realized before we started, I didn't draw this little diagram very well, but it's just to show that everything in life kind of grows and dies out and grows again. And if you look at that first curve, the ideal point at which to make a change is obviously at the top of that curve, where the green X is. I should have drawn it higher in the curve at the top. That's the time we should be making a change. But the problem is, whenever we introduce some kind of change, initially it comes with a discomfort and it creates new challenges. So when you start something new, there's potentially a little bit of a dip. And who wants to be at point B on the graph when you could be at point A? So we resist change until it's too late. And then we get to where the red X is. And through a crisis, we are forced to implement change. And then that dip starts kicking in. And actually, you are way more steps behind where you could have been had you implemented change at an earlier point. So I sometimes think maybe that's why the Roman Empire collapsed, because who wants to change when you're having peeled grapes popped into your mouth? So again, it's about managing our immediate emotion rather than dealing with the bigger picture problem. Also, on the emotional level, I think the same holds true. I've noticed over the years in the work that I've done, or clients that I've worked with, the people who benefit most, who make the most change, are the ones who are prepared to step outside of their comfort zones on the emotional level, who are prepared to actually make themselves vulnerable. And ultimately, they actually are able to, through that, develop greater toughness. And then just the last contextual point, mental health requires the experience of a range of different emotions, spanning both the negative and the positive ends of the spectrum. Negative emotions can be very helpful. For example, fear is an adaptive thing. It focuses us, it makes sure we prepare properly for danger, or if it's danger we can't cope with, it helps us to avoid it. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, lots of you will know, popularized the notion of going through different emotional stages in grief. So the point is that changing emotions are a totally normal part of being a human being. But for some strange reason in our society, and especially these days with social media, we have pathologized any negative emotion, and we kind of feel we should always be happy, which actually is weird if you think about it. It's not possible, and it's certainly not normal. So it's very important to not just experience a range of different emotions, particularly at difficult times like what we're all going through now, but actually to be prepared to sit with them and realize that it's okay, and actually get on with what needs to be done in spite of those negative feelings, rather than trying to immediately hide those negative feelings under whether it's alcohol or overwork or over exercise or sleep or eating, whatever it might be. Okay, so that was just I think, a few principles which guide us in formulating strategies to build resilience. So as I said, I was going to list a whole long list of things to add into this toolbox, but I've ended up just wanting to talk rather about two key things. And it's actually two lists which I would challenge you to make for yourself. And the first is a blueprint or a checklist of helpful behaviors, which I'll explain shortly. And the second one is then a selection of skills which for you can aid the implementation of those behaviors. So I just want to talk quickly about the first one. This graph, you normally find it on page 1 of most sports psychology textbooks. And it's the graph from which the popularized term being in the zone comes from. So on the y-axis is your performance, how well you're doing. On the x-axis is how psyched up you are. And you'll see the red zone way to the right is when the person is psyched up too much, they're too nervous, too angry, whatever, and they cannot perform to their best. And at the other extreme, the blue area, those people also don't perform to their best because they may be too casual. But it's in that green zone in the middle, when you are psyched up to just the right level, that you are able to perform optimally. So I think that's a very important concept also for life. And I just want to show you quickly, this is a sheet that comes out of a corporate workshop that I run, which is called In the Zone, and it uses that concept of being in the zone. And don't worry too much about the actual items. What I'm trying to show you here is, in that workshop, I actually talk about 10 things which I think are important to functioning optimally in life and at work. Doesn't matter what those 10 items are. I wanted to show you that the way people in that workshop are encouraged to score themselves. So each of the 10 items, you'll see down the middle, the darker blue, that's what's marked as 100%. So after each module, the person is asked to rate themselves on how optimally they are doing that particular item. And notice that the 100% is in the middle. If you go either way, to the left or to the right of that, the percentages start decreasing. So one of my pet hates is when people talk about putting in 120% effort. That's too much. It's 20% too much. You may as well put in 80%, get the same outcome, and actually save yourself a bit of energy. So the ideal is somewhere in the middle. So the key point is, we need to find what are those items which for you are really helpful, which keeps you functioning optimally in life, at work, in your relationships, etc. And really, what is for you that right level? You don't want to do them too much. You don't want to do them too little. So just a few examples of things. I think an obvious place to start for developing such a checklist for yourself is the lifestyle factors we often talk about: exercise, nutrition, sleep. Those are obvious areas in which we can do too little or we can do too much. You need to find what is for you that ideal amount. And I was going to say something else. Oh yes, and all of those things buffer us in terms of how we cope with stress. So for example, exercise, we know from the research that fitter individuals respond, first of all, respond less dramatically to stress on the physiological level. I'm talking about things like heart rate, blood pressure, etc. But not only do they respond less dramatically than unfit subjects, they actually also they come back to normal much quicker. So they return to baseline much quicker. So if you're developing yourself a personal blueprint, I would suggest you start with the lifestyle factors. And then there are a few things which, for a lot of people, most people, are important: work, whether that's for income or fulfillment or both; family, perhaps spiritual; social, I've put dash media, because especially now a lot of that is happening via social media. And then of course there are also many personal things. So for example, for me, the outdoors is one of them. There's a little element of being outdoors which is very important for me, and when I'm not able to do that, well then that's never a good thing for me. And whatever matters to you, time for yourself where you can do nothing or read or whatever it might be. And I've added in news updates because I think, especially at this time during the lockdown and the whole COVID thing, I think one can stay totally ignorant, which is not great, or you can, again, go to the opposite extreme and just over-immerse yourself constantly, which is probably not that helpful either for a number of reasons. Okay, so the point with this list of things, if you develop your own list of what works for you, is finding the right amount which is best for you. And then, I mean, we can almost think of them as your KPIs, your key performance indicators, which I talk about in business, and that you can check in with regularly. Are you in fact still doing these things? Gilbert alluded to starting something and then gradually just tailing off. So check in with yourself about your own blueprint at regular intervals. About a year or two ago, I did a talk, one of the Risky Business lecture series to medical doctors, and I was talking about balance and in their lives, and my final point was that making sure that they have these non-negotiable minimums that they do consistently to look after themselves isn't just the right thing for them and their well-being. It's actually their ethical responsibility to their patients to also look after themselves, because otherwise they cannot function optimally in their work. So these are just some examples, certainly not a comprehensive list. The point is you need to find your own blueprint of what works for you. Once you have that first list, then the second list I'm suggesting is to develop some skills. And I'm going to go through this very quickly. These are just a few examples to show you what I'm talking about. But these are skills which are needed to implement those healthy behaviors, your checklist. For example, saying no. So some of you might be thinking, well, I'd love to go outdoors every day. I'd love to exercise every day. I'd love to do all these things, but I just don't have time, and there are too many other people demanding my time and attention. Maybe one of the skills you need to add into your toolbox is that of saying no, which in some senses is already there. We have a lot more skills than often we give ourselves credit for, but perhaps you haven't been using it in all areas of your life, and that takes practice. Another example would be self-control. On the Healthy Weight program at Sports Science, we talk a lot about how do you develop trust in your ability to keep the promises that you make to yourself. Relaxation exercise, Gilbert also alluded to this kind of thing that you can learn to control systems in your body, which we tend to think we can't. I mean, I've worked with a free diver who on certain parts of certain dives, he's had his heart rate recorded at under 20 beats per minute. I didn't even realize that was possible to still be alive. Now that's an extreme case, but he has learned those skills through practice, and we can similarly develop techniques to keep us calm, focused, to become more aware of when I'm carrying unnecessary physical tension and to be able to release that. And there are many simple things out there. If you just Google relaxation exercise, there's so much, but the key thing, as Gilbert also alluded to, is practice, practice, practice. Mindfulness training. We live in a world which encourages the exact opposite of mindfulness. We're watching TV and there's someone signing in the corner of it, and there's a ticker tape going across the bottom while we on our cell phones and also having a conversation and eating all at the same time. We're actually doing everything mindlessly. So it's no surprise that mindfulness has become such a buzzword at the moment in our society. And all mindfulness is a way of paying attention in the present and non-judgmentally. Whatever I'm doing, tying my shoelace, eating, my mind is full of just the present. And when my mind wanders off, as it often does, it's happening to all of us, even during this webinar, all we do is we just bring it back. And that's a skill that can be practiced, and like all skills, responds to practice. Time and energy management, I'm not going to say too much about that, but for some people that's key to getting things right. And really the crux of that is ensuring that how you spend your time and energy day to day is congruent with what actually matters most to you in the grander scheme of things. Better thinking habits. We are constantly brainwashed that we should be thinking positively. Positive thinking is definitely more helpful than negative thinking, but by far the most useful thinking style, both for our well-being and for our performance, is to think truthfully, to see things as they actually are. When we respond, when we observe things as they actually are, we are better placed to choose a response, as opposed to when we judge things as to how they should be, then we end up reacting and we are at the mercy of what's going on. And finally, emotional regulation. I'm going to stop now. I'm sure I'm running out of time. But learning to manage our emotions is an important skill. I said that feeling different emotions is normal, but our challenge is to make sure that the intensity of our emotion fits the circumstance. And there are many tools out there that can help you learn to do that. If I can just quickly maybe take a minute to talk about worry as an example, because I think that's something that a lot of people are sitting with at the moment. Imagine that we have a fixed capacity for worry, a certain amount, and we need to assign where we are going to worry very carefully, like you manage a budget at work. So if we have a fixed amount of capacity, we also need to bear in mind that everything we do has risks. Even just sitting here, there's a risk that a meteor could come through the roof. It's unlikely, but it's possible. So everything we do or don't do involves risk. If, for example, I'm driving down the main road, and driving down the main road, every block there's an intersection, and there's a risk at every intersection of a car coming through from one of the side roads. But if I choose to worry about every single intersection I go to, I'm going to end up ironically driving very dangerously. I'm going to keep slowing down at every intersection, and I'm actually probably most likely going to be the one that causes an accident. So we have a fixed amount of capacity to worry. So choose where you assign it to and where you don't, what risks you are simply prepared to take. Last point about that, in terms of deciding, well, how do I choose where to assign my worry? Two key questions. One, is it genuinely important in the grander scheme of things? Maybe what the weather is tomorrow is not as important as we sometimes make it out to be. So is it genuinely important? And secondly, can I do something about it? If you can answer yes to both questions, then worry. Then worry fulfills a useful function. If you can't, then let it go. Okay, I'm sure I'm out of time. Just quickly in summary, I'm suggesting you develop a personal checklist of helpful behaviors. Make sure, find the right degree, whatever that means for you, not too much, not too little of each of those, and make that right amount of those behaviors an absolute non-negotiable in your life, which you check in with regularly. List your existing skills, resources, and view any time that you're stuck or you don't know what to do now, you can't implement your helpful behavior, rather than giving up, view it as an opportunity to develop a new skill, which is then a new thing for your toolbox. And if you're really not sure what to do on your own, there is help out there. Ask for help, whether that's professional help or there are plenty of other resources like Lifeline, etc. And I just, last minute this morning, I actually decided to write you a list of questions, which, Phatho, perhaps these can be circulated to whoever's interested, just for you to pose yourself to help you along the way. And that's all from my side. Thank you for listening.
So thank you to you both, Clinton and Gilbert, for sharing those really empowering insights. I feel both calmed and energized by the conversation today. There's a few questions that have come through. And again, at this particular point, I invite you to post your questions on the Q&A in Zoom, or of course, you can post your questions on Facebook. But let's kick off because our time is limited. the first question really just speaks to a question many of us have been grappling with. And the question is, what's the best strategy to navigate the current, I don't know how to pronounce the word, zeitgeist, so the current essence of our times? How can I shut out the external world without losing touch with society? And perhaps I should ask you to tackle that one, Gilbert.
Thank you, Patu. I think, so one of the things that's happened with lockdown, if you think about how you would take time out to work casually at home and formally work in the office, and in working at home, you've sort of merged those two. That's the first thing that happened. And so at home, you had a multitude of other, call it chores, which suddenly is added onto the list of things to do in the day. And you have responsibilities. And then there's, I need to know what's happening outside. So, and I'm plugged into a community who the only way they can check in on me is to sort of call me onto a meeting, onto a WhatsApp, onto some platform. And so I'm informed by all these things, and it consumes me. And how do I begin to establish boundaries that says, these are the times that I'm available to check those things. This is what I'm going to be doing in that time. And unless I do it, I'm just swept off my feet with all this stuff coming at me. And so it requires a lot of discipline to begin to push back. Clinton alluded to this, is how do I learn to say no to certain things and yes to others? And how do I manage that in a day? Because it could become quite overwhelming.
Absolutely, thank you. You touched on one of the points raised in another question. So, and one of the points is, it speaks to this challenge that many of us are facing working from home. A question from Professor Alice in September, and perhaps Clinton, I'll start with you for an answer here. Just observing that the traditional borders of time and days are blurred, and that's resulting in those unusual shifts of sleep, working hours, meetings. The question is this associated with the crisis? And also really just your advice on how we better manage and negotiate these boundaries to offer improved balance.
Yeah, thanks for that. You know, normally in my work, when we're dealing with stress management, we talk about kind of similar to what I alluded to earlier. What are the non-negotiable minimums in my life, which are really key to helping me keep going in the longer term? What are those non-negotiable minimum things? But actually, so that's dealing with people who are stressed, who have an overload, that are very busy. But at the other extreme, when there's suddenly more space than normal, and how to handle that, the answer is actually exactly the same. What are those key non-negotiable minimums that I should put in as an absolute routine because they keep me moving forward and prevent me from gradually running more and more to standstill? And it's those things that I spoke about. There's a minimum amount of exercise, socializing, et cetera, et cetera. Gilbert, I think, just said the same. It's about really mapping out a day, and we don't want to overplan the day. I mean, old-fashioned time management is about rigidly timing from minute to minute, but we all know that it doesn't work because the phone rings or whatever. It's about the only thing you schedule in rigidly are those non-negotiable minimums. And there should be lots of space in between where you can do whatever the universe is demanding of you. It doesn't matter. But at least those key things are holding you on track towards what matters most to you in the grander scheme of things.
Thank you, Clinton. I'm going to shift to something that makes me uncomfortable, but you both spoke about it. You both spoke about sitting with your discomfort. And when you find yourself vulnerable, stay there. Brené Brown does a lot of work on the power of vulnerability. And perhaps I'm bringing up a topic that we certainly don't have justice to delve into. But perhaps just from both of you, your 1-minute insights on that concept of sitting in your vulnerability, something that I know will make very many people uncomfortable. So perhaps while you're on unmute, Clinton, I'll start with you and then end with Gilbert.
Yeah, I mean, I deal a lot, and especially, for example, in sport, you know, where there's the whole macho thing. So I deal a lot with people who the only negative emotion that they are comfortable with is anger. Kind of, and often males, I'm stereotyping it, but males more than women are socialized towards that. That if you feel angry, it's kind of okay, but any other negative emotion like fear, sadness, guilt, or whatever, that's not okay. And it all comes out as anger. And at the core, all of us are essentially vulnerable, but around that we have this mask of being effective as a parent, as a psychologist, as a whatever it is that we do. And it's important to have that. But when it becomes so thick that we lose, that other people are never allowed to see what's inside, or even worse, when it becomes so thick that I myself lose sight of what's inside, that's when it becomes dangerous. Because then if there is a crisis, if I end up in ICU with a heart attack, that's when all that stuff comes gushing out, and people end up being more traumatized by the emotions they're experiencing than by the actual physical setback. I've gone off there. I've lost what the initial question was. Sorry.
It's about spreading vulnerability, but I'm mindful of time as well. Gilbert, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I'm a lot more curious around how do we become comfortable with the things that we are comfortable with. And if you fully explore that, they're not really that comfortable to begin with. Secondly, quite often we have the notion that we need to expand, right? One of the reasons to expand is to deal with the complexity coming at us. Robert Keegan does a huge amount of work around that. And so unless you're going to expand, you're going to stay the same. And expansion, I mean, can you imagine a caterpillar turning into a butterfly wanting to do it easily? It's not going to happen. And so if your point of departure is to call it, this is going to be stressful, then it's going to be. But if you invite, it's going to be a stretch for me, and Clinton alluded to some things that I can build, I can enlist support, and it's going to be a stretch for me. But you know what? In the end, I'm going to become more of who I want to be. That's when I begin to author how I shapeshift and navigate my discomfort.
Thank you for that. The questions are streaming in, and I am mindful of time. So if our audience will, I'll just answer one or two more questions and then close it. And what we will do is those that we haven't gotten to address in this format, we'll just address after the webinar. So perhaps one question to maybe Gilbert, let me start with you. A comment that super successful people in life, the sub-2-hour marathon guy, Elliot, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, they don't work 40-hour weeks. Allegedly, they work more. So it seems that achieving great success requires some kind of unbalance. Really quick comments on that, please, Gilbert.
Yeah, thank you. It's a nice question, and it's seemingly unbalanced from the outside. But when you become passionate about something, your passion drives your curiosity, and it goes beyond time. It doesn't exhaust, it excites you. And so when you're looking at it from the outside, you see that guy works 12 hours, but for him, he's exploring for 6 of the 12. And so it's not draining his energy. It actually is empowering him. And so I guess it's find what are the things that really energizes you, and could you expose yourself to more of those? And then the invitation is, what are the new things that could energize you? What are the new things you're going to be trying? Are you going to be experimenting? Or do you like this thing called the comfort zone? And the comfort zone we know is not a comfort zone, right? Because it's marred with pockets of discomfort. And it's again back to the labeling. So I think what people often refer to as a comfort zone is a familiar zone. I know the zone well. And if I aspire to design a comfort zone for myself, what would it look like? I mean, Clinton was speaking about a blueprint very quickly. So we will design the best strategies for our organizations to take them forward and make them sustainable. And back at the ranch, what do our own strategies look like that we're offering ourselves?
Thank you, Gilbert. Last question, because I think it is an important question, and the doctor and me can't let it go. And this is going to be to you, Clinton, and I'm going to ask for a very brief answer. So I'll summarize the question really, but the request is for your opinion on the link between psychology and perhaps your more mental strain and the risk of injury. And this relates to sports injury, but certainly I could extrapolate, they can go, is there a link between mental strain or psychological stress and ill health? So really brief comment on that. Yeah,
very brief comment, very broad question. Yes, I believe absolutely there is. What I observe in a lot of athletes, when they are under pressure, they are more likely to get injured. And I don't understand exactly the mechanisms around that. Perhaps a young gymnast, for example, when she's feeling pressure, stress of competition, is more likely to injure herself, perhaps because her attention isn't where it should be, etc. When it comes to physical health, we know that there are some physical ways in which mental stress causes issues physically. But yes, it absolutely has an impact. It's very difficult to spell out the mechanics of that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Clinton. Thank you. So in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap up our session today. Clinton, Gilbert, thank you for your incredibly valuable and empowering insights. Thank you also to the audience for participating. And again, to those people whose questions we didn't get to, I'll undertake to make sure that we do address those questions to you afterwards, if there's a platform to do so. Next week, you can look forward to a webinar with Professor Vicky Lambert and Professor Ross Tucker in a conversation about exercise immunity and the COVID-19 pandemic. We'll detail the clinical importance of physical activity during this time and break down the how much is enough, how much is too much, and what is effective given the restrictions in place. I'm ending the session emboldened by the reminder that it is possible to find strength in the face of hardship. Today, we've been empowered with the toolkit. Thank you, Clinton and Gilbert, so that we can face the challenges ahead with the confidence that we will overcome. Stay hopeful as you look ahead into the future. The night may seem long, but morning always comes. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.